Why was everyone laughing at the front of the classroom? Because the woman standing there didn't belong. At least, that's what they thought. The Navy SEAL classroom buzzed with low whispers, the kind that carry between clenched jaws and smug smirks. A few boots scraped against the tile. The smell of salt water still clung to the recruits' uniforms, their shirts half-dried from the morning's punishing obstacle course. Every man in that room had endured weeks of bone-breaking endurance. They had crawled through sand, bled through blisters, and tasted ocean salt until their lips cracked. These were the strongest, toughest, most relentless men the Navy had found. And yet, every one of them now leaned back in their chair, arms crossed, smirking at the figure standing calmly at the front. She looked small, ordinary, petite glasses perched on her nose, auburn hair tied into a neat bun. No uniform, no insignia, no combat gear, just pressed khakis and a white shirt rolled neatly to her elbows. She could have been a university professor. Maybe she was. "Cute professor," one recruit muttered. Another added, "Wrong hall, ma'am." Even Merrick Davenport, the largest man in the room, 6'4", all muscle and certainty, folded his arms and smirked. "We're here to fight," his eyes seemed to say, "not sit through psychology lectures." At the back, the training officer, Lieutenant River, cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, as of this week, you'll spend 4 hours a week in asymmetric warfare theory. Dr. Elaine Thorne will be your instructor." The reaction was almost audible, a ripple of suppressed laughter and disbelief. 4 hours of theory. To men forged in fire, it sounded like punishment. Davenport leaned back, his smirk sharpening. "With respect, ma'am," he said, his tone halfway between mockery and politeness, "the enemy doesn't care about your theories when bullets are flying." For a moment she said nothing, just looked at him, not judging, not angry, but measuring. Then she said softly, "Sharp trainee, Mr. Davenport, show me your room-clearing procedure." The class chuckled. Davenport rose. This would be quick. He moved with textbook precision, crisp angles, fluid motion, each step exactly by the book. She watched silently, arms crossed. When he finished, she nodded once. "Textbook indeed," she said. "Now let me show you the 7 fatal flaws in your approach." For 10 minutes she dismantled his performance piece by piece, not mocking, not cruel, but surgical. Every blind spot, every angle of vulnerability, every predictable habit. The recruits leaned forward. Their grins faded. What she pointed out wasn't in any manual. Her language was too exact, her awareness too real. When she finished, the room was quiet. Davenport's jaw tightened. The faint burn of humiliation crept up his neck. And then, as she reached to pick up a marker, her sleeve slipped, just for a moment. The jagged edge of a scar ran around her wrist. She adjusted it quickly, but one recruit, Calloway, noticed. He didn't say anything, but from that moment something about her didn't add up. That day set the tone for everything that followed. Her lectures weren't about tactics alone, they were about perception. She spoke of cognitive traps, anchoring bias, fatal tunnel vision. The mistakes soldiers made when they relied on instinct instead of thought. "Your body reacts faster than your brain," she told them, "but sometimes that's how you die." The men shifted uneasily. This was not the training they expected. They wanted fire, not theory, action, not introspection, but she refused to bend. When they rolled their eyes, she smiled. When they sighed, she waited. When they mocked, she kept going. Davenport grew restless. Every minute in that classroom felt like an insult to his strength. "We need to be stronger, faster, more aggressive," he said one afternoon, frustration cracking through his voice. "That's what keeps us alive." Her answer came quietly. "The strongest operator I ever knew died because he couldn't adapt." The words fell heavy. Not a soldier she'd read about, not something from a case study. She said it like someone who had been there. For a moment, no one moved. Then she continued her lecture as if nothing had happened. But the silence that followed was different, uneasy, curious. Some recruits leaned in after that. Others rolled their eyes harder. Davenport simmered in between, caught between contempt and something he didn't yet understand. By the second week, she had them running sensory drills. Strange ones. Lights flashing, sound distortions, illusions meant to disorient even the best. Men who could run 12 miles in the dark suddenly stumbled like rookies. They fell, cursed, got lost in their own heads. "This isn't training," Davenport muttered loud enough for all to hear. Thorne's gaze turned sharp. Ramadi Province, 2012. 3 operators killed. Insurgents used these very tactics. Physical strength couldn't save them. Training like this would have. The laughter stopped. The room stayed silent. The way she said it, cold, factual, exact, left no space for argument. Still, resentment built. Some of the recruits started avoiding eye contact. One morning, someone drew a cruel caricature of her on the whiteboard, a frail professor carried off by real soldiers. When she walked in, she looked at it for a moment, then erased it, wordless, and began the lecture. But Calloway, quiet and observant, waited after class. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, "I wanted to apologize. Not everyone thinks this is a joke. Some of us see value, but Davenport runs the room." She gave a faint smile, "Until he doesn't." That day she divided the class into teams for sensory manipulation drills, harder than before. Lights flickered, alarms blared, fog filled the training bay. Within minutes, men who could dismantle a rifle blindfolded were lost in confusion. They tripped, panicked, called out to one another. Even Davenport's team stumbled back in defeat. "This exercise," she said calmly, "was designed to fail. Your bodies are strong, but your minds are untrained. That changes now." Davenport snapped, "This is a waste of time." Her eyes narrowed, steel behind the glass. "In Kandahar, I watched a man die because he thought exactly like you. His muscles couldn't save him. His mind could have." The room froze, watched. The word hung like smoke. And Davenport's certainty, the armor he wore so easily, began to crack. 3 weeks in, the tension was unbearable. Every class felt like a battlefield, only without bullets. Pride, doubt, fear, they all collided in that small room. That morning, Thorne stood before the whiteboard, dissecting their latest simulation. Her voice was calm, clipped. "Your entry pattern creates a funnel. In Fallujah, that same maneuver cost 4 operators their lives." Davenport's patience finally broke. "With all due respect, ma'am, this isn't something you learn from books. These tactics were tested in combat by real operators." Her marker clicked against the board. She didn't look at him as she spoke. "The Alisgari district's upper floors create crossfire zones. 7 seconds after breaching, your team would be dead. I know because I've seen it." Too specific, too real. The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. Calloway noticed something else, the way she touched her side when she spoke about chest wounds, as if remembering pain instead of citing research. And when she described the sensory distortions of a first combat kill, how time slows, sounds warp, colors sharpen, her tone was clinical, but carried a weight no textbook could fake. Davenport couldn't hold it in anymore. "How would you know what it feels like to take a life?" The classroom went dead silent. Thorne didn't flinch, didn't blink. "Page 94, she said softly. "Your reading covers neurological combat stress. Let's continue." Her refusal to rise to his challenge only enraged him further. The class ended in thick silence. Men filed out quickly, avoiding her gaze, but Davenport stayed. He waited until the room was empty, then stepped closer to her desk. His voice dropped low, sharp, dangerous. "I think it's time we stop pretending. You're teaching warfare to men who will actually fight, while you've never seen combat. That makes you a liability." She stacked her papers slowly, methodically. "Your concern is noted." "No, you don't get it." He stepped closer, the air between them tightening. "These men trust me. They'll follow me into combat, not you. Your theories undermine everything we've built." Her eyes lifted finally, calm, steady, unyielding. Leadership isn't about being the strongest in the room. It's about knowing when strength isn't the answer. Something inside him snapped. Before he even realized it, his hand was around her throat. The motion was fast, primal, filled with the kind of anger that fear disguises as control. He slammed her against the wall, his grip tightening. Gasps echoed from the doorway. A few recruits had lingered, frozen in disbelief. "This is combat, Professor," Davenport snarled. "This is what we're training for: threats, violence, not your theories." For a single heartbeat, she didn't resist. Her eyes locked onto his, cold and terrifyingly calm. Then everything changed in a blur. The woman they thought was fragile vanished. Her hand shot up, breaking his grip. A twist, a pivot, a sharp movement too fast to track. And then a sickening pop. Davenport's massive frame hit the floor, face first, pinned beneath her knee. The room went utterly still. His shoulder hung uselessly, dislocated. She didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't shout. She simply released him, stood, and adjusted her shirt. The door opened. Commander Blackwood stepped in. His expression was unreadable, almost unsurprised. "At ease, Major," he said. The word echoed through the room like thunder. "Major." Every recruit froze. The scholar was gone. The warrior remained. No one spoke. The silence felt heavier than gunfire. Davenport knelt on the floor, his arm hanging uselessly, eyes wide in stunned disbelief. Every recruit stood frozen, faces drained, pride shattered. Only the sound of their own breathing filled the air. Commander Blackwood's boots echoed across the tile as he stepped forward, gaze fixed on the woman who, moments ago, they thought was just a professor. "Gentlemen," his voice carried iron and finality, "allow me to properly introduce your instructor. This is Major Elaine Thorne, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Call sign, Wraith. 15 years of operational experience. Silver Star, Purple Heart. Pioneer of cognitive warfare tactics that rewrote our doctrine, and the sole survivor of Operation Obsidian Shield." No one moved. No one dared. The word "sole survivor" cut through the air like glass. Every SEAL in that room had heard whispers about that mission, the one no one spoke about out loud. A classified operation where an entire team vanished in the mountains, presumed dead. Every man except one, but no one ever knew her name until now. "Wraith." Davenport's throat went dry. His pulse thundered in his ears. She looked down at him, calm, controlled, detached. And for the first time since she'd entered that room, the recruits saw not fragility but a quiet kind of violence, a poise that only comes from having stood on the edge of life and death too many times. Commander Blackwood's gaze swept across the stunned room. "You mocked the very tactics that have saved lives across battlefields. You dismissed lessons written in blood. Major Thorne's scars were earned where most of you would never survive. She's here because strength alone isn't enough anymore. Learn that now, or you won't last." He turned sharply on his heel and left the room. For a long moment no one moved. Then Thorne finally spoke, voice steady, eyes unreadable. "Class dismissed." They filed out silently. No one laughed. No one muttered. Even Calloway, usually the first to speak, said nothing. When Davenport finally stood, grimacing, arm cradled against his side, he didn't meet her eyes. The room emptied, leaving her alone. She reached for her papers, arranging them neatly as if nothing had happened. The calm wasn't an act, it was habit. Control was her armor now. Outside, the sun was lowering over Coronado, washing the base in a fatting orange glow. But inside, the air still smelled like adrenaline. The next morning, training was suspended. Commander Blackwood entered the empty classroom, his face unreadable. "The men need 24 hours, he said flatly. "Davenport, under review. His career may be over." Thorne didn't look up from her papers. He acted on assumptions, wrong, dangerous ones, but genuine. Sometimes pain is the only teacher. Blackwood studied her for a long moment. You could have neutralized him without injury. Her eyes flicked up. Yes, but he needed to feel the cost of his arrogance. He said nothing more. He didn't have to. That evening, when most of the base had gone quiet, Thorne walked the empty corridors toward the medical bay. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, too familiar, too close to another memory she'd buried deep. Davenport sat alone on the bed, his shoulders strapped in a sling. He didn't look up when she entered. "They're separating me," he muttered. "Assaulting an instructor. I'm finished." She stood still, her expression unreadable. "Is that what you want?" He looked up, eyes red, voice cracking. "What I want doesn't matter. I crossed the line." She stepped closer, her tone calm, even. "It matters to me, because I haven't signed off on your paperwork yet." He blinked, confused. "Why wouldn't you? I attacked you." "You did," she acknowledged softly. "Because you thought I was a civilian academic teaching theories that could get your men killed. Misguided but rooted in loyalty. That instinct I respect. It's the foundation of leadership. The problem wasn't your protection. It was your assumptions." He looked down, shame settling heavy on his shoulders. "So, what happens now?" "That depends on you," she said. "You can leave with your pride intact and your ignorance unchallenged. Or you can stay and learn what true strength requires, mental as well as physical." For the first time his defiance faltered. He met her gaze, the fight gone from his voice. "I was wrong about you, about combat. I want to learn." She nodded once. "Training resumes at 800. Don't be late." Morning arrived with a different kind of silence. The classroom was full again, but the air was charged, not with defiance but anticipation. Every recruit stood at attention when she entered. No whispers, no laughter. Even Davenport, arms still in a sling, stood tall. "Seats," she said simply. The room obeyed. For a moment she just looked at them. Then softly, "Questions." Calloway was first to raise his hand. "Ma'am, is it true? You were the only survivor of Obsidian Shield." She paused, eyes distant. "Yes, my team was ambushed. 7 operators lost. I sustained multiple injuries but extracted with critical intelligence." Silence. You could hear the breath leave their lungs. Another voice, fallen this time. "Your scars on your wrist, Kandahar." Thorne's eyes flickered. "Captured, tortured, nerve damage permanent." No one spoke after that. The quiet wasn't out of fear anymore, it was respect. And for the first time she felt the shift. The skepticism was gone. In its place, understanding. Finally, Davenport raised his good arm. His voice was steady but softer than before. "Major, you said the strongest operator you ever knew died because he couldn't adapt. Who was he?" She looked at him for a long moment. No sound in the room but the faint hum of the lights. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something raw. "Your father, Chief Garrett Davenport." The color drained from his face. She continued quietly. "He saved my life twice before losing his own. Stronger than 10 of me. But he relied on muscle alone. When injury took that, he couldn't adapt. That cost him everything." The air went still. "My father," he whispered. She nodded. "Yes, and that's why I'm here, because physical strength isn't enough. Adaptation is survival." He swallowed hard. For the first time, there was no pride in his expression, only pain, and a kind of understanding that comes when the past you never knew suddenly finds you. She looked away, regaining composure. "Let's begin." The weeks that followed changed everything. The recruits who once laughed now leaned forward, hanging on her every word. The theories they mocked became lifelines. Her voice, calm, deliberate, rhythmic, carried a weight none of them could ignore. Her lessons were no longer abstract. Every principle had blood behind it. Every mistake she described had a name, a face, a consequence. Davenport became her most attentive student. His transformation was the talk of the barracks. The man who once sneered at her now listened with fierce intensity, scribbling notes one-handed, volunteering for every drill he could. Where he once relied on brute force, now he paused, thought, adapted. And the others followed. It wasn't obedience, it was respect. They began to understand what she had been trying to teach all along, that true strength wasn't domination, but control, that the mind was the weapon everything else depended on. When she spoke of combat, it wasn't from textbooks. When the first shot goes off, she told them one night, your mind fractures. You'll want to act before you think, but that's when the enemy wins. You don't survive by being the fastest. You survive by being aware. Her voice carried that quiet gravity that comes from truth, the kind that silences a room without raising its volume. Even Blackwood noticed. He began observing from the back of the room more often. Sometimes he'd catch her lingering too long on a memory, eyes distant, a tremor in her breath she quickly suppressed. But he never interrupted. He knew the ghosts she carried were part of what made her lessons real. The transformation in the recruits was undeniable. Their physical performance improved, yes, but it was their mental resilience that shocked the command. They began solving problems faster, thinking like predators rather than prey. Every mistake became a lesson instead of a defeat. And in the middle of it all stood Thorne, calm, composed, teaching the next generation of soldiers not just how to fight, but how to survive themselves. Late one night, long after curfew, she found Davenport still in the training bay. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his face pale, but his movements precise and methodical. His injured arm hung uselessly, but he had built new drills that compensated for it, forcing his mind to think faster than his pain. "Working late, trainee?" she asked, stepping into the dim light. He stopped, panting, smiling faintly. "Yes, ma'am, adaptation isn't optional, not anymore." She studied him for a long moment, the ghost of a smile crossing her face. He reminded her of his father, not in strength, but in heart. Except this time, maybe she could prevent history from repeating. As the weeks turned into months, something else began to shift inside her. For years she had carried her survival like a sentence. The nightmares of Obsidian Shield never fully left her. The screams, the smoke, the faces she couldn't save. For a long time she believed she had no right to teach, only to atone. But watching these young men transform, watching their arrogance dissolve into purpose, something inside her began to quiet. Not heal, but soften. Maybe this was her redemption. Not vengeance, not pride, but legacy. That night, after everyone was asleep, she stood alone on the empty training field. The wind carried the faint scent of salt from the ocean. She could almost hear their laughter, her old team, ghosts in the wind. "I'm still here," she whispered, "and they're learning." Her eyes glistened under the dim floodlights. She closed them, took a slow breath, and let the silence settle. Why did she hesitate before starting the next lesson? No one in the room noticed, but for the first time, Major Elaine Thorne's fingers trembled as she lifted a piece of chalk. The movement was subtle, controlled, but not invisible. To her, it felt like lightning under her skin, a reminder of nerves burned out long ago in a place she never wanted to remember. She drew a crude outline of a building on the board, a two-story compound with narrow corridors. "Today's scenario," she said evenly, "isn't theoretical. This is a reconstruction of a real mission." The recruits leaned in. They had learned by now that when Thorne spoke of real missions, something heavy followed. "This is not about marksmanship," she continued. "Not about strength. It's about awareness, the ability to process chaos without losing yourself." Calloway frowned. "Ma'am, was this one of yours?" She hesitated, just long enough for the silence to sting. "Yes, Obsidian Shield. My last mission before command pulled me out of field ops." The air shifted. Even Davenport, who had grown used to her calm authority, felt a knot form in his gut. He glanced around the room. Every man sat straighter. No one joked anymore. 7 operators entered, she said softly. Only one came out. This scenario is their mistake and my burden. Her voice didn't break, but there was something in it, something hollow. She handed out the layout sheets. You'll work in 2 teams. Objective, extraction of a hostage from a fortified position. But you won't have all the information. You'll never have all the information. That's the point. The recruits began planning immediately, murmuring strategies, drawing routes. She watched silently, arms folded. Occasionally, her gaze drifted to the window where the California sunlight glared too bright, too much like the desert sun she'd once cursed under her breath. When both teams presented their approach, she nodded. Proceed to Simulation Bay. Inside the mock compound, the lights dimmed. Sirens blared, lights flashed, and the sound of distant gunfire filled the room. Fog machines pumped smoke into the hallways. This was not a clean drill. It was confusion, disorientation, fear, and that's exactly what she wanted. She observed from the control booth as they moved, clearing rooms, covering corners. They were good. Not perfect, but better than before. The rhythm was there, methodical, deliberate. Then it happened. A flash grenade, screams from the speakers, smoke thicker now. The system threw chaos at them. One recruit stumbled, another panicked, losing his line of sight. Hold your pattern, Davenport's voice barked through the noise. But in the chaos, his commands fractured. His team split, one going left, the other right. Thorne watched it unfold like an echo from her past. Her pulse spiked. The visuals blurred. For a second, she wasn't in Coronado anymore. She was back in the desert. Dust choking the air. Radio static screaming. Her team scattered in the same confusion, the same split. Thorne, fall back, someone had shouted then. We're compromised. She blinked hard, dragging herself back to the present. Below, the recruits regrouped. Davenport's voice steadied. Calloway on me, fallen, suppress left. They moved tighter now, recovering. She exhaled quietly, forcing her pulse down. When the exercise ended, the recruits filed out, panting, sweat-drenched but proud. Davenport approached her, breathing hard. We improvised, ma'am, adapted mid-pattern, thought that was the point. She looked at him, saw the dirt on his face, the raw exhaustion in his eyes, and for the first time since she'd returned to the program, she almost smiled. It was, she said, but tell me, what cost did improvisation have? He frowned. 2 men lost simulated vitals during the shift. Exactly. Adaptation without awareness kills faster than hesitation. You corrected too late. That's why we practice until awareness becomes instinct. Davenport nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. He didn't argue, he just listened. But Calloway, always braver than the rest, asked quietly, Ma'am, what happened on that mission? The real one. Her jaw tightened. You're not ready for that story. He nodded, understanding. But as the class dismissed, she didn't leave the room right away. She stood alone in the empty classroom, staring at the ghostly outlines of her diagrams. 7 arrows converging on one building. 7 men. Only one came out, she whispered. The sound of her own voice felt foreign. That night, sleep didn't come easily. It never did when she opened that part of her memory. Her dreams weren't cinematic. They weren't even linear. They were sensations, flashes. The smell of sand and iron. A hand gripping hers in the dark. The sound of someone screaming her name, cut off mid-breath. She woke up drenched in sweat, her pulse hammering. For a long time, she sat on the edge of her bunk, elbows on her knees, breathing slow. You're not there anymore, she told herself. They're gone, you're still here. She didn't cry, she never did, but her hands trembled when she reached for her glass of water. The next morning, she was back in the classroom before dawn. The recruits wouldn't arrive for another hour, but she preferred it that way. She needed the quiet, the smell of chalk and paper, something normal. When Calloway arrived early, she didn't hear him at first. He stopped at the door, unsure if he should interrupt. She stood facing the window, sunlight tracing the faint scars along her wrist. "Ma'am," he said softly. She turned, startled. "You're early." "Yes, ma'am, I wanted to ask something." She waited. "Why stay? After what happened to your team, why keep doing this?" For a long time she didn't answer. Then she said quietly, "Because their deaths have to mean something, and because someone once saved me when I didn't deserve it." He nodded slowly. "Was it Davenport's father?" Her eyes flicked toward the floor. "Yes, Garrett. He was my commanding officer. He never stopped believing in his team even when the odds were hopeless. That's what killed him." Calloway swallowed, unsure how to respond. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "He thought strength was enough. He thought he could carry everyone. I watched that belief die with him. I made a promise that day, never again." Her voice cracked just slightly. Then she straightened. "You should get ready for training, Calloway." He hesitated. "Yes, ma'am." When he left, she exhaled slowly, alone again. Later that day, the recruits assembled on the obstacle field for a new series of tests. This time, the drills weren't about tactics at all. "Today," Thorne announced, "you'll face controlled failure." The men exchanged confused looks. "You'll fail every drill I give you. Every one. The point isn't to win, it's to learn how your mind reacts when you lose." The exercises were brutal. She simulated comms breakdowns, equipment failures, injury scenarios. She stripped them of control, one layer at a time. By mid-afternoon, half of them were ready to snap. Calloway dropped to his knees after another failed iteration. "Ma'am, this is impossible." Thorne's tone was cold. "Then find a way to make it possible." Davenport gritted his teeth, sweat dripping from his brow. "We've tried every configuration." "Try again." The tension boiled over. "We've been running this for 6 hours." Thorne's eyes hardened. "And how long do you think the enemy gives you to rest when your comms go dark?" The recruits fell silent. The rage burned out of them, replaced by something else, shame, maybe, or understanding. "Failure isn't defeat," she said. "It's data. It tells you what your limits are, and if you don't learn them here, they'll kill you out there." Her words lingered long after the session ended. That night, most of the recruits went straight to bed, too exhausted to speak. But Davenport stayed behind again, replaying the drills in his mind. When she passed the training bay, she found him sitting alone on the floor, head down. "Rough day?" she asked quietly. He looked up, eyes hollow with exhaustion. "Feels like you're breaking us, ma'am." "I am," she said simply, "so I can rebuild you." He didn't answer, just stared at the floor. "Do you know why you lost today?" "Because I wasn't strong enough." She shook her head. "Because you didn't trust anyone else to take the lead when you faltered. Strength isn't a wall, Davenport. It's a bridge. If you can't share it, it collapses under you." He looked up at her, eyes tired but alert. "That what killed my father?" She hesitated, then nodded once. "Yes." For a moment neither spoke. Then she turned to leave. "Get some rest, tomorrow's worse." He almost smiled, looking forward to it. Days bled into nights. The class that had once mocked her now moved like a unit. Failures turned into lessons, lessons into instincts. The transformation was visible, tangible. They were sharper, calmer, quieter. But Thorne, she wasn't sleeping. Every night she saw it again, the ambush, the fire, Garrett's voice shouting orders through the smoke. The weight of his body when she dragged him out, bleeding. The moment she realized he wouldn't make it. She woke up gasping every time. By week's end, her hands had started shaking again, not from fear, but from exhaustion. During a briefing one morning, she caught herself zoning out mid-sentence. The recruits didn't notice, or pretended not to. But Blackwood, watching from the back, did. After class, he pulled her aside. "You're overextending." She didn't look at him. "They're making progress." "At what cost to you?" She turned, eyes sharp. You brought me here to make sure they survive. That's what I'm doing. He sighed. You're still trying to save ghosts, Elaine. Her jaw tightened. If those ghosts keep these men alive, then I'll keep carrying them. She walked away before he could respond. That night in the empty training hall, she stood alone again. The lights dimmed, the world quiet. She looked down at her scarred wrist, the reminder of everything she'd endured, and whispered, "You taught me to adapt, Garrett. I'm teaching them to do the same." Her voice trembled on the last word. Outside, the ocean roared against the shore, indifferent. And somewhere inside her, a truth was starting to form, one she hadn't dared face until now. You can teach others to adapt, but you can't keep avoiding your own pain forever. What happens when the teacher forgets she's still healing? No one at Coronado saw the cracks forming, not in Major Thorne's armor, not behind her calm voice or steady walk. But beneath that composure, pressure was building, the same kind that breaks steel before it bends. The recruits noticed in subtle ways. The pauses between her words were longer. Her eyes sometimes drifted to the horizon mid-sentence. When she spoke of awareness, her tone carried something else, not instruction, but remembrance. They didn't know that a new directive had arrived that morning. A classified live exercise, full simulation, real environment, unpredictable outcomes. The kind of training most instructors avoided because it blurred the line between simulation and survival. But Thorne had approved it herself. She wanted to test them and herself. At 400, the recruits were loaded into trucks, eyes covered, gear strapped tight. They didn't know where they were going. She wanted them disoriented, unprepared. Real combat rarely came with clarity. When the blindfolds came off, they were deep in the coastal hills, fog hanging thick over the terrain. The valley below was dark, dotted with faint lights. "This is Operation Gray Veil," Thorne announced. "Simulated hostage recovery, unknown resistance, no radio support, no extraction until completion. You'll operate under full blackout conditions." She looked at them one by one. "This is not a test of strength. It's a test of adaptation. Fail to think, you fail to survive." Blackwood stood a few meters behind, arms crossed, watching her. He knew what this was, not just a test for them, a test for her too. "Teams Alpha and Bravo," Thorne ordered, "move." They disappeared into the fog. From her vantage point on the ridge, she watched their patterns through thermal optics, heat signatures moving like fireflies in the dark. Her earpiece crackled with coded transmissions. "Alpha team advancing. No contact yet." She listened, silent, breathing steady. But inside, a storm churned. This was too close. The fog, the silence, the echo of boots against dirt, it all felt like déjà vu. Blackwood approached quietly. "You're pushing them hard." She didn't look at him. "They need to learn to trust the unknown." "And you?" Her jaw clenched. "I already did." He didn't push further. He could see her knuckles whitening around the binoculars. Below, Team Bravo, Davenport's unit, was advancing along the dry riverbed. Their movement was tight, efficient, every step measured. He led with calm authority now, not arrogance. Thorne's earpiece buzzed again. "Alpha encountering resistance, simulated contacts." A burst of static, then shouting. "We're compromised, Bravo shifting position." Her pulse spiked. The sounds were too real, screams, gunfire blanks, radio crackle. Her vision tunneled. For a moment, she wasn't in the hills. She was back in the desert. Dust storms blinding her. Garrett shouting orders. "Fall back, Wraith, fall back." She turned too late, the explosion swallowing everything. Her hand trembled. "Thorne," Blackwood's voice cut through, low and steady. "Stay with me." She blinked hard, forcing herself back. "Status on Bravo." "Still active, moving to assist Alpha." She switched frequencies. "Davenport, hold formation, flank east." Then the radio went dead. Static hissed in her ear. Her heartbeat roared. "Blackwood," she said tightly, "they're out of comms range. I'm going in." He stepped in front of her. "Negative, it's a controlled drill. You break protocol, you compromise command integrity." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "If they're trapped, I'm not watching it happen again." He saw it then, the fear she'd hidden for months, the ghost still leading her decisions. But before he could stop her, she was already moving, silent, fast, vanishing into the fog. The hills were darker up close, the air thick with mist, the smell of dirt and metal. Her boots sank into mud as she navigated the slope, body moving on instinct, every sense sharpened. Her flashlight stayed off. She didn't need it. Her mind built the map as she moved, muscle memory from too many nights like this. Distant sounds echoed, shouts, fake gunfire, confusion, then silence. Too much silence. She crouched low behind a ridge, scanning with her night scope. No movement, just faint heat signatures scattered in chaos. Then a sound behind her, soft, deliberate. "Friendly," a voice whispered. She froze. Davenport. He appeared through the fog, face smeared with dirt, rifle slung low. "Comms are fried. Alpha's down to 3. We've been circling blind." She exhaled slowly. Relief, but not enough to steady her pulse. "Status of the hostages?" she asked. "Unknown, sims glitching. Half the terrain markers are off." She nodded. "That's by design, keep moving." He hesitated. "Ma'am, permission to ask something off record." She raised an eyebrow. "Make it quick." He swallowed hard. "You keep talking about awareness, but what about the things you can't control? What if you're aware and still too late?" The question hit her like a bullet she didn't see coming. Her eyes flicked to the horizon. "Then you live with it," she said softly. "And if you're lucky, you find a way to make sure no one else has to." He nodded. He didn't understand yet, but one day he would. They moved together through the dark, two ghosts in fog. When they found Alpha's last position, the scene was chaos. Training markers scattered, bodies with simulation vests flashing red. The ambush had been executed flawlessly by the instructors running the op from another site. She crouched beside one of the downed recruits, checking his vitals. "Simulation terminated," blinked across his vest. "Just a drill." But her mind didn't see that. Her hands moved faster than reason, searching for real wounds that weren't there. "Ma'am," Davenport said quietly, "it's over. This was the endpoint." She didn't hear him. Her breathing grew shallow, her vision swam. "Not again, not again." She reached for her headset, but her fingers trembled too violently to attach it. "Major," Davenport said, voice firm now, "we're done here." Her gaze snapped to him, wild, haunted. For the briefest moment, he saw not his instructor, but a soldier trapped in a loop of ghosts. Then her expression hardened again. "You're right, gather your men, debrief at base." They hiked back in silence. Davenport stayed close behind, protective now, even though he didn't know why. Back at base, the recruits were exhausted but buzzing, the adrenaline high of survival. But the instructors saw something else. Something was wrong with her. Blackwood found her sitting alone in the operations tent, hands clasped, eyes distant. "You broke protocol," he said evenly. She didn't look up. They were in danger. "It was simulated danger, you know that." Her jaw tightened. So was Obsidian Shield until it was. He sighed. "Elaine, you're not in that desert anymore." She looked at him finally, eyes red. "Then why does it still smell like sand every time I close my eyes?" He said nothing. He'd seen combat, but not what she'd seen, not that kind of loss. After a moment she stood. "If I'm too compromised to continue, file the paperwork." He shook his head. "You're not compromised, you're human." That word stung more than she expected. The next day she walked into the classroom late. The recruits were already seated, silent, waiting. She placed a single file on the desk. Yesterday's operation. Failure rate, 72%. Success rate, irrelevant. What matters is what you do with what went wrong. Her voice was steadier today, but quieter, more measured. Every one of you experienced confusion, disconnection, loss of control. That wasn't an accident. That's combat. That's life. The moment you stop thinking you can control everything, that's when you start surviving it. Calloway raised his hand. Ma'am, are we done with the psychological drills? She met his eyes. No, we've just begun. The room chuckled nervously, but her gaze stayed steady. She wasn't joking. That night she couldn't sleep again. But this time she didn't fight it. She walked down to the shore, the dark Pacific stretching endlessly ahead. The cold wind cut through her sleeves, but she didn't flinch. She sat on the sand, listening to the waves. For once she let herself remember. Garrett's voice, the gunfire, the silence afterward. She whispered into the wind, "You were right, I couldn't save you, but I can save them." Her voice trembled on the last word. Behind her, footsteps approached softly. Davenport. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked quietly. She didn't turn. "You shouldn't be out here." "Neither should you." For a long moment, they just listened to the ocean. Finally she said, "You remind me of him, you know." "My father." "Yes, same eyes, same pride, but you've already learned what he never could." He looked out at the waves. "And what's that?" She turned slightly, eyes glinting under the moonlight. "That strength isn't something you prove, it's something you share." He didn't answer. He just nodded slowly, the sound of the surf filling the silence. For the first time since she'd returned to training, she allowed herself to breathe, not like a soldier, but like a human being. As dawn broke, the recruits assembled again. This time, no one needed to be ordered. They were already in formation before she arrived. She looked at them, faces hardened by discipline but softened by understanding. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were something more. "Today," she said quietly, "we begin phase 2. You'll lead under pressure without me." Confused glances. "I'll observe from a distance. You'll adapt without direction. That's how you'll know you're ready." She paused, eyes scanning each face. "And when you fail, and you will, you'll get up, again and again. Because resilience isn't built by victory, it's built by endurance." Davenport met her gaze, understanding completely. The woman they once mocked was no longer just a teacher. She was the mirror through which they saw themselves, flawed, tested, still standing. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was standing alone. Why did the alarm sound at 300? No one knew, not at first. The recruits thought it was another of Major Thorne's psychological tests, one of those sleep-starved, heart-pounding drills designed to blur the line between discipline and instinct. But when the base loudspeakers cracked alive with the words "Real World Alert," every man froze mid-movement. Sirens wailed through the barracks. Floodlights bathed the compound in white glare. Instructors sprinted across the gravel. The smell of diesel and ocean salt filled the air. Thorne was already awake. She'd been sitting at her desk long before the alarm, eyes fixed on an old mission photo she rarely let herself touch, 8 faces, one now blurred by time. When the klaxon sounded, she didn't flinch. She just stood, buttoned her jacket, and stepped into the corridor. Outside, the chaos was immediate. Blackwood intercepted her near the command truck. "Unidentified vessel grounded 2 miles off Silver Strand," he barked. Coast Guard picked up distress beacons. Could be smuggling, could be worse. We're the closest rapid response element. Her eyes narrowed. "My trainees. They're the only ready team on site." She hesitated. "They're not cleared for live engagement." "Neither was you," he said quietly, handing her a comms headset. "But you adapted." For a heartbeat she wanted to refuse, wanted to stay the teacher, not the soldier. But then she saw them forming up in the yard. Davenport, Calloway, Fallon, the others. Faces she'd forged through sweat and failure, waiting for her word. "Gear up," she said finally. "We're moving." The convoy rolled out under blackout lights, engines humming low against the coastal wind. Inside the lead Humvee, Davenport checked his rifle with practiced calm. Beside him, Calloway stared out at the sea, the dark horizon flashing faintly with lightning. Thorne sat across from them, silent. The rhythmic vibration of the tires brought memories she didn't want, the last convoy she'd ridden in, the one that never made it back. She closed her eyes, steadied her breath, counted heartbeats until the memories dimmed. When they reached the strand, the scene came into focus. A small cargo vessel half submerged near the breakers, hull cracked open like a wound. The Coast Guard perimeter was thin, lights flickering in the fog. Blackwood's voice came through the headset. Thermal shows multiple heat signatures on board, unknown count, possible hostiles. Copy, Thorne replied. Bravo 1 moving to breach. She turned to her men. Rules of engagement, defensive only. Identify before you fire. We're not here to start a war, we're here to prevent one. The recruits nodded. Every movement was silent, precise. The discipline she drilled into them now real. They advanced through ankle-deep surf, rifles raised, the crash of waves masking their approach. The air smelled of oil and rust. At the vessel's hull, Davenport whispered, "Entry point starboard breach. Looks clear." Thorne studied the angle. Not clear, the lights too still. Someone killed the generator manually. He frowned, meaning whoever's inside knows we're here. She climbed first, always first. Inside, the corridors were narrow metal walls slick with seawater. The beam of her flashlight cut through the dark, catching torn netting and scattered crates. No movement, just the sound of dripping water and distant creaks of metal. Calloway whispered, "Ma'am, this is a smuggler's layout. Compartments for contraband, not passengers." Thorne nodded, scanning. Then why the distress beacon? A sound answered her, a faint clatter ahead. She raised a hand. The team froze. Footsteps slow, deliberate. Davenport took point, weapon steady. As they turned the corner, a figure emerged, small, shaking, hands raised. A child. "Jesus," Fallon muttered. Thorne lowered her rifle instantly. The girl couldn't have been more than 10, drenched, eyes wide with terror. She pointed toward the rear hold, words tumbling out in a language Thorne didn't understand. But fear needs no translation. "Human trafficking," Thorne whispered. "That's what this is." Calloway swore under his breath. "We need medics." "Not yet. Secure the area first." They moved deeper, guided by the girl's trembling hand. At the next hatch, Davenport halted. "Movement. 2, maybe 3. Thorne nodded, flash and clear. The breach was clean. A flashbang ignited, echoing through the hold. When the smoke cleared, 2 men lay disoriented on the deck, makeshift weapons beside them. Not insurgents, smugglers, terrified, desperate. Davenport's finger hovered near the trigger. "Orders, ma'am." Thorne looked at the men, malnourished, shaking, more afraid than dangerous. "Detain, not engage." He hesitated, the old reflex still there, to strike first, to dominate. But then he remembered her words. Leadership isn't about being the strongest in the room. He cuffed them without a word. They moved again. The final hold was sealed from inside. Davenport placed his palm on the cold metal. Heat signatures, 3 bodies, 1 moving. Thorne exhaled, "On my mark." They breached and chaos erupted. A single gunshot cracked through the corridor. The bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her back against the wall. The recruits returned fire, blanks swapped for live rounds in an instant of confusion. One smuggler went down, screaming. "Cease," she shouted, voice raw. "Cease fire." The echo faded. Davenport knelt beside her, eyes wide. "You're hit." Just a graze. Blood seeped through her sleeve, bright against the khaki. She pressed a hand to it. "Secure the room." Calloway's voice shook. "Hostages clear, area secure." The girl from before ran to her, sobbing against her arm. Thorne knelt, ignoring the pain, whispering calm words she didn't remember learning. When Coast Guard reinforcements arrived minutes later, the recruits were silent, eyes haunted. They'd trained for chaos but not for the smell of real blood. Blackwood appeared through the haze, face hard. Extraction now. Thorne nodded, standing on her own. Everyone accounted for. Yes, except you should be in a med bay. Later. Back at base, dawn was breaking, soft light over the compound, the kind of beauty that always felt wrong after violence. The recruits sat on benches outside the infirmary, uniforms stained with salt and rust. No one spoke. Inside, a medic stitched her shoulder quietly. She barely felt it. Her mind was elsewhere, on the child's face, the terror in her eyes. The same terror she'd once seen in her reflection after Obsidian Shield. Blackwood entered, voice low. You saved 12 people today. That beacon came from the girl's father. He died before we arrived. Thorne closed her eyes. And the traffickers? In custody. International authorities are taking over. She nodded, but her face stayed blank. The recruits. They're outside, shaken, but alive because of you. She didn't answer, just stared at the bandage on her arm, another mark to add to the others. After a long silence, Blackwood said, You know you could have stayed back. Let command handle it. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You don't teach courage from a distance. He studied her for a moment, then said softly, You can't keep carrying everyone, Elaine. I'm not, she said. I'm just making sure they don't have to carry me. Hours later, she found Davenport still sitting by the shore, gear beside him, staring at the horizon. He didn't stand when she approached. They said you'll be fine, he murmured. I will. He glanced at her bandaged arm. You didn't have to go in there. We could have handled it. She shook her head. No, you handled it because I was there, but next time you won't need me. He frowned. You mean next time? I mean someday. You'll lead without looking over your shoulder for someone to save you. That's when I'll know I've done my job. He was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, When you got shot, I froze just for a second. I thought I'd lost another parent. Her breath caught. He stared at the water. I didn't realize until today that you're part of my father's story and mine. You're the bridge between them. She didn't speak, just placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and steady. Then cross it, Merrick, keep moving forward. That evening the base held an unscheduled assembly. Blackwood stood before the recruits, his tone formal but proud. Early this morning, under live conditions, this unit executed a successful rescue operation with 0 civilian casualties. Major Thorne's leadership and your discipline prevented a tragedy. The men applauded softly, uncertain whether celebration felt right. Thorne stepped forward, stopping them with a raised hand. You did well, she said quietly, but don't mistake survival for victory. The world won't always thank you for what you do. Sometimes the mission ends with silence, and that has to be enough. Her gaze swept over them, voice softening. Every life you save becomes a scar you carry. It's not a burden, it's a reminder. She turned toward the flag whipping in the coastal wind. I used to think strength was the absence of pain. I was wrong. Strength is carrying pain without letting it poison you. The recruit stood motionless. No cheers, no noise, just the sound of the sea beyond the walls. Later, alone in her quarters, she opened the old photograph again. Garrett Davenport smiling, arm around his team. Herself in the corner, younger, unscarred, unaware of what survival would cost. She traced a fingertip across the faces, whispering their names. I brought them home, Garrett, all of them. The room was silent, except for the steady rhythm of waves outside, the same ocean that had witnessed her fall and rise. She closed the photo, slid it into a drawer, and for the first time in years, turned off the bedside light without fear of the dark. Outside, the recruits gathered near the training field. Davenport watched the barracks window where her light had gone out. She's finally sleeping, Calloway said quietly. Davenport nodded. Yeah, but not because she's tired, because she's at peace. They stood in silence for a moment. Soldiers no longer defined by arrogance or doubt, but by the quiet understanding of what it meant to carry scars with dignity. For them, the night no longer symbolized fear. It meant rest earned the hard way. And somewhere inside that stillness, Major Thorne's words lingered like an oath carved into the wind. Strength isn't domination, it's adaptation. She had lived it, taught it, bled for it. And now, in the soft calm before dawn, her recruits finally understood. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the review board call her in at dawn? No one told her why. They didn't have to. In the military, silence was an answer all its own. Major Elaine Thorne sat in the narrow waiting room outside the administrative offices, her posture straight, her uniform immaculate. But her eyes betrayed the fatigue of someone who hadn't slept, not from fear, but from awareness. The kind that comes when you already know how a story ends. Across the hall, behind closed doors, Commander Blackwood's voice echoed faintly. Unauthorized engagement, real-world interference, breach of protocol. Every word another nail. She'd heard it before, years ago after Obsidian Shield. Back then, they'd called it recklessness. This time, they'd call it insubordination. Either way, the meaning was the same. She'd acted when she wasn't supposed to, and saved lives no one wanted to acknowledge were in danger. When her name was called, she stood, straightened her shoulders, and stepped into the room. 3 officers sat behind a long table. No smiles, no introductions, just cold authority. Major Thorne, the lead investigator began, you were ordered to observe, not engage during Operation Gray Veil. Yet you personally entered the field. Explain your actions. Her voice was steady. Communications failed. My recruits were without command guidance. I made a decision to ensure their safety. By violating chain of command. By preventing a tragedy, she replied quietly. The man leaned forward. You sustained a gunshot wound in the process. That could have resulted in your death or theirs. You put the mission at risk. Her jaw tightened. I put myself at risk. The mission was already compromised. Major, another officer interjected, the Navy appreciates your record, but your conduct remains questionable. This is the second time you've operated outside parameters. Obsidian Shield resulted in 7 casualties under your leadership. She cut in, voice sharp as a blade. Obsidian Shield wasn't a failure of leadership. It was a failure of intelligence. We were sent into an ambush with incomplete data. The room fell silent. The lead officer's expression didn't change. That distinction doesn't alter the outcome, does it? You were the only survivor. Her fingers curled tightly at her sides. And that's exactly why I teach the way I do, so none of them end up like the men I lost. He studied her. You've turned that loss into doctrine, admirable, but not everyone agrees with your methods. Thorne said nothing. Blackwood, standing at the back, finally spoke. Her method saved 12 civilians 2 nights ago. I'll sign my career on that fact. The officer glanced at him. You already have, Commander. The review board will deliberate. Major Thorne, you are relieved of instructional duties pending final decision. The words landed like cold water. Relieved. She stood at attention, eyes forward, understood. When she left the room, the corridor felt too bright, too sterile. The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee, things that didn't belong in a world of fire and blood. Outside, the recruits were waiting. Davenport stepped forward immediately. What's happening, ma'am? She looked at him, at all of them, young, raw, not yet hardened by bureaucracy. I'm being reassigned. Calloway's voice cracked. Because of Gray Veil. Yes, but you saved lives. I also broke protocol, she said simply. The recruits exchanged glances. anger mixing with disbelief. Davenport's jaw tightened, then the system's broken. Her eyes softened. The system's human, it makes mistakes, but you don't fix it by defiance, you fix it by discipline. He took a step closer. And what about loyalty? She held his gaze. You show it by standing your ground, not burning it down. Her words were quiet, but they cut deep. She turned to leave. Continue your training. Commander Blackwood will take over. Ma'am, Davenport said firmly, we're not done learning from you. She paused. You are. Now you learn from yourselves. That evening the base felt heavier, like the air itself had changed weight. Thorne's office was half-packed, papers neatly stacked in boxes. Her nameplate sat upside down on the desk. The faint smell of ocean drifted through the open window. Blackwood entered without knocking. You don't make this easy, do you? She smirked faintly. Never have. They'll strip you of classroom command, but the review won't touch your record. I'll make sure of that. I'm not worried about my record, she said. I'm worried about what happens to them. He studied her for a long moment. You did what you came here to do, Elaine. You turned arrogance into awareness. You gave them something no one else could. Her voice dropped, barely above a whisper. Then why does it feel like failure? Because it always does when you care. She looked out the window. The recruits were still running drills under the floodlights. She could hear Davenport's voice calling orders, firm but calm. He was leading with restraint now, her restraint. Do you think they'll remember? She asked softly. He followed her gaze. They already do. The next morning she was gone. The classroom sat empty, her whiteboard still bearing faint traces of yesterday's lesson. Perception is survival. Davenport stood alone, reading the words over and over. When Blackwood entered, he didn't turn. Where did she go? Transfer orders. Advanced Warfare Research Division. She's off-grid. Just like that. That's how ghosts move, son. Davenport clenched his fists. She deserves better. Blackwood nodded slowly. So do a lot of people who wear the uniform. You honor them by carrying what they taught you. The word stayed with him. That night Davenport gathered the others in the training bay. The air smelled of sweat, oil, and salt, familiar, grounding. He stood where she used to, voice steady. We keep going, every drill, every failure. We don't stop because she wouldn't. Calloway nodded. She told me once that strength is sharing the burden. Guess this is ours now. They trained until dawn. Not because anyone ordered them to, but because it felt like the only way to say thank you. Weeks passed. No word from Thorne. The recruits completed the program, graduated into active SEAL qualification. Their records listed them as the first unit to complete cognitive warfare integration training, the same program she had built from the bones of her past. At the ceremony, Commander Blackwood read the commendation with a firm voice. This unit demonstrated exceptional adaptability under pressure. Their performance sets a new benchmark for special warfare readiness. Applause followed, brief and respectful, but Davenport wasn't listening. His eyes were scanning the crowd, searching for a face he knew wouldn't be there. When the trident was pinned to his chest, he felt pride and something else, an emptiness that looked a lot like grief. Later, as the crowd dispersed, he found Blackwood near the flagpole. Any word? Blackwood shook his head. She's off the radar, but people like her don't disappear. They just move in quieter ways. Davenport looked out at the horizon, the same endless blue she used to watch. Then I'll wait. Miles away, at a secure facility whose name didn't exist on any official record, Thorne sat in a small observation room. Below, operators ran drills she had designed, simulations of chaos, failure, and adaptation. Her theories had been weaponized now, integrated into the broader doctrine. She should have felt pride. Instead, she felt distance. A technician approached. Ma'am, the system's responding beyond projections. real-time cognitive resilience up 37%. Thorne nodded absently. Good, keep monitoring. When he left, she exhaled slowly, rubbing the scar on her wrist. Blackwood had been right, ghosts move quietly, but even ghosts crave meaning. She opened a classified file on her screen, Next Gen Operator Development Initiative. Her name wasn't on it anymore. Her fingerprints were everywhere. She leaned back, closing her eyes. In the darkness behind them, she saw the faces again: Garrett, her team, the recruits, Davenport's steady gaze. For the first time in years, those memories didn't hurt. They just were. Back at Coronado, Davenport's team was deployed for their first real mission, a covert rescue op in the Middle East. Before takeoff, the pilot handed Davenport a sealed envelope. This was left in command with your name on it. Davenport frowned, tearing it open. Inside, a single piece of paper, written in a steady, familiar hand. Don't fight like me, think like you. You already have everything you need. O.T. He folded the note carefully and tucked it into his vest. When the ramp lowered and the roar of the wind filled the cabin, he stood a little taller. Because somewhere out there, maybe watching, maybe not, he knew she believed in him. 3 months later, a letter arrived at Naval Command. No signature, no return address. Inside, a brief report handwritten. Cognitive warfare integration has demonstrated measurable success. Recommend reinstating program permanently under Naval Special Warfare Command. Operators are surviving longer, thinking faster, leading better. They are adapting. Attached was a single trident pin, polished, untouched. Commander Blackwood held it for a long time before locking it in his desk. He smiled faintly. Well done, Major. Somewhere far from the base, maybe a coastline, maybe another continent, a woman walked along the edge of the sea. The sunset painted her face in gold and scarlet. Her hair, once tied in regulation bun, now moved freely in the wind. Her eyes, the same calm steel that had once silenced a classroom, were softer now. She carried no rank, no weapon, just peace. As the tide washed over her boots, she whispered, "You were right, Garrett. Adaptation isn't about surviving the mission. It's about surviving yourself." The ocean didn't answer, but it didn't need to. And back at Coronado, the recruits she'd once taught, now soldiers, leaders, warriors, carried her lessons into places she'd never see. In every decision made under fire, in every soldier who paused to think before acting, in every life saved by awareness instead of strength, she lived on. Not as a legend, not as a myth, but as the quiet voice inside their minds reminding them. Strength without thought is wasted, and courage without restraint becomes chaos. Sometimes heroes don't wear medals or command ceremonies. Sometimes they simply teach others to survive and disappear before anyone can say thank you. Major Elaine Thorne had vanished into the silence she always belonged to. But her legacy remained. Not the missions, not the scars, not the commendations, but the transformation of men who learned to see beyond strength. Because in the end, her story was never about war. It was about the moment when a broken soldier looked into her own reflection and realized survival was not the absence of pain, but the mastery of it. And as long as one of them remembered that, she would never truly be gone. Why did silence always come before the fight? Merrick Davenport had never feared battle, but silence, real silence, the kind that pressed against the chest before contact, that still made him remember her voice. "Listen to the silence," she used to say. "It tells you what the noise will hide." He was listening now. The mountains of eastern Syria loomed in shadow, the air thick with dust and the metallic taste of tension. His team crouched in the ruins of an old village, waiting for signal confirmation. This was his first mission as team lead. Real combat, real risk, no instructor watching from behind glass. Except she was still there, in his mind. It had been 4 months since Major Thorne's disappearance. 4 months since the review board silenced her name and rewrote her program into something colder, less human. But every man under Davenport's command still carried her lessons. Every hand signal, every breath before breach, every decision, it all whispered of her. 30 seconds to go, Calloway murmured beside him, eyes on the watch. Davenport adjusted his earpiece, scanning the perimeter. The mission was simple on paper: extraction of a humanitarian doctor trapped behind a hostile blockade. But nothing was simple anymore. Not in this place. He exhaled. We go in quiet, adapt to what we find, not what we expect. The team nodded. The countdown hit 0. They moved. The compound was smaller than intel suggested: old concrete walls, rusted gates, flickering light. As they slipped inside, Davenport's pulse steadied, his movements fluid. This was where he belonged. But as he turned the first corner, something felt off. The air was too still, the shadows too deep. "Calloway, hold position," he whispered. He felt it before he saw it, that electric instinct Thorne had drilled into him. The weight of wrongness. Then a sound, faint clicking. "Tripwire," he hissed. Too late. The explosion wasn't large, just a flash charge, but it filled the room with deafening light. The concussion knocked him back, ringing in his ears. "Status," he barked. "Fallen's hit." He crawled toward the downed man, blood slicking the floor. Shrapnel had torn through Fallen's thigh. Bad, but survivable. "Pressure," Davenport ordered. "Calloway, stabilize him." Then came the second realization: they weren't alone. Footsteps above, fast, coordinated. "Ambush," he muttered. He'd been here before, not physically, but in memory. The same setup, the same arrogance of thinking he was ready. But this time, he wasn't the student anymore. He heard her voice like a whisper through the static of fear. "Awareness, always awareness. Don't fight the fight you imagined, fight the one you're in." He looked around, walls narrowing, only one exit. Bad geometry. He made the call. "Smoke out, rear retreat, east side." Grenades hissed. White fog exploded across the corridor. They moved fast, dragging Fallen through the haze. Bullets sparked off the concrete behind them. When they finally broke through the far wall, the night air felt like oxygen and fire all at once. "Fallen stable," Calloway said, panting. "Lost blood, but he's conscious." Davenport nodded, scanning the horizon. "Regroup at Point Echo. We're not done." The extraction zone was a burned-out orchard, twisted trees, dry soil, a single road cutting through. The helicopter wouldn't arrive for another 10 minutes. Too long. Davenport set up a perimeter, placing his team in defensive arcs. Then faint movement, headlights flickering in the distance. 2 trucks, armed men. Calloway's voice tensed. "We can't hold this position, Merrick." He looked at his team, 4 men, 1 injured, limited ammo. He'd seen this before in her training scenarios, simulated over and over until failure turned to instinct. "Hold," he said calmly. "Let them see what we want them to see." He took Fallen's rifle, aimed it toward the north. The trick wasn't to fight harder, it was to control perception. "Weaponize what the enemy believes," Thorne had said once. "Turn his assumptions against him." He moved quick, setting decoys, flashing a light through broken brush, planting sound emitters from their packs. By the time the trucks arrived, the illusion was alive, phantom movement in the fog, the crack of false gunfire echoing off the hills. The enemy split formation, chasing ghosts. That was the moment Davenport waited for. "Shift west now." They vanished through the trees, silent as shadows. 10 minutes later, when the helicopter's downdraft whipped dust into the sky, every man was aboard. Fallen bled, but he lived. The doctor was safe. And Davenport, for the first time, understood what it meant to carry someone else's legacy and make it your own. Back at base, the after-action review was clinical. 0 civilian casualties, One wounded SEAL, full extraction success. But paperwork didn't tell the truth of a mission, only memory did. Davenport sat alone in the locker room, staring at his reflection. The faint ring of tinnitus still hummed in his ears. He reached into his vest and pulled out the folded note she'd left him months ago. "Don't fight like me, think like you." He read it again, slower this time. Then he smiled, not with pride but with something gentler, gratitude. Calloway entered quietly, limping slightly. "They're saying we might get commendations for this." "Commendations don't matter," Davenport said softly. "Survival does." "Yeah," Calloway chuckled weakly. "That sounds like her. She'd hate the ceremony. Probably wouldn't even show up." They both laughed, the first real laugh in days. 2 weeks later, Davenport was summoned to the same office Thorne once stood in. Same table, same sterile light. Commander Blackwood was there, arms folded. "Sit down, son." Davenport obeyed, wary. "I read your report," Blackwood said. "You broke radio silence, adjusted the extraction point without authorization. You realize that's insubordination," Davenport finished for him. "Yes, sir." Blackwood's mouth twitched. "You sound just like her." He slid a folder across the desk. "Mission results speak louder than procedure. Washington's impressed. You'll receive a field promotion." Davenport frowned. "With respect, sir, I didn't earn that alone." "No," Blackwood agreed. "But you proved something she always believed: the doctrine works because it's human, not because it's perfect." He leaned back, studying him. "You ever wonder why she left?" "Every day." Blackwood sighed. "She didn't leave to hide. She left so her lessons wouldn't be confined by uniform or approval. Sometimes the only way to protect what you've built is to walk away before they can take it from you." Davenport nodded slowly. "Then maybe she's freer than any of us." That night Davenport walked down to the shoreline, the same stretch where she used to stand after training. The wind howled through the dark, the sea crashing like distant artillery. He closed his eyes and let her voice return. Not words now, but presence, the calm steadiness that had once terrified and comforted them in equal measure. He spoke softly into the wind. "I think I get it now. You weren't teaching us to survive war. You were teaching us to survive ourselves." The waves answered in rhythm. He took the folded note from his vest one last time, read it once more, then tore it gently in half. The pieces scattered into the sea. "Thank you, Major," he said quietly, "wherever you are." Months passed. Missions blurred. Davenport's unit grew sharper, faster, quieter. They became known within command as the Adaptive Division, the informal name spreading through ranks like rumor and legend. But it wasn't the name that mattered. It was the method. Every man in that unit led with Thorne's principles: precision under pressure, awareness under chaos, and compassion even in war. On one mission, when a young recruit panicked mid-firefight, Davenport pulled him behind cover, looked him dead in the eye, and said exactly what she once told him. "Your fear isn't weakness, it's information, use it." The recruit steadied, breathed, and finished the op. Later, he said it was those words, not the training, that saved him. One night, returning from deployment, Davenport received a sealed package. No sender, no insignia. Inside, a single USB drive and a note. "For your eyes only." He plugged it into his secure terminal. The screen flickered, then a video began, grainy footage from an unknown location. There she was, Elaine Thorne, older maybe but unmistakable. She stood against a backdrop of gray cliffs and stormy sea. The audio crackled, but her voice came through, calm, unwavering. "If you're watching this, it means you've led. And if you've led, you've made mistakes. That's good. Mistakes mean you took responsibility. You've probably learned by now that the world doesn't reward compassion, but that doesn't make it wrong. Leadership without empathy is just control. Remember that." I'm still out here training others, teaching in ways the Navy doesn't need to know about. The work continues. Adaptation never ends. Don't come looking for me. Just keep the promise you made the day you stood back up." She hesitated then, the faintest flicker of emotion breaking her composure. "Tell them I'm proud, all of them." The screen went black. Davenport sat motionless for a long time, the sound of her voice still vibrating in the quiet room. Then slowly, he smiled, that same quiet, humble smile she used to give after a lesson well learned. He whispered, "Message received." Weeks later, during a debrief, one of his men asked, "Sir, you ever think about retiring?" Davenport chuckled softly. "Not yet. There's still someone else who needs to learn to think before they shoot." The man laughed. "Sounds like something Wraith would say." He nodded. "That's because it is." The room went quiet then, not out of sadness but respect. Her name, once whispered in disbelief, now spoken with reverence. That night, after everyone had turned in, Davenport stood alone under the floodlights of the training field. He could almost see her there, standing where she used to, calm and unflinching, waiting for him to challenge her again. "Still teaching, Major?" he asked into the dark. The wind carried only silence. And somehow that was enough. Because silence was her language. And silence meant she trusted him to continue. Why did the next generation remind him so much of her? The first day of the new training cycle, Davenport watched the recruits file into the same classroom that had once broken and remade him. The same walls, the same salt-stained floor, even the faint smell of chalk and sweat still hung in the air. But she wasn't there. Major Elaine Thorne, Wraith, had been gone for 2 years. No trace, no official record. The Navy spoke of her in past tense, the way the military always spoke of those it couldn't explain. But for those who had trained under her, she was everywhere in the discipline of their drills, the quiet moments before a mission, the steady voice in their heads that whispered adapt. Now Davenport stood where she once stood. His uniform bore the insignia of command, but his stance carried her silence. The recruits shifted restlessly, uncertain how to read him. They saw a man built like a statue, leaner, sharper, eyes unreadable. To them, he was another instructor to endure. He could almost hear the ghosts of his own youth, the whispered jokes, the arrogance, the disbelief that someone smaller, calmer, smarter could ever command them. He didn't start with orders. He started with a question. "Who here thinks strength is what keeps you alive?" Hands went up, almost all of them. He nodded slowly. "Good, you've all been told that since you were children that muscle wins, that toughness saves, that fear kills. It's a lie." The room stilled. He let the silence linger, the way she used to. "Strength will fail you," he said softly. "Your mind won't. The strongest man I ever knew died because he didn't adapt. The smartest woman I ever met survived because she did." One recruit frowned. "With respect, sir, who was she?" Davenport's eyes drifted to the window. The Pacific shimmered beyond the glass. "She was my instructor," he said. "She taught me that courage isn't about charging forward. It's about staying steady when everything inside you screams to run." He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. He could feel her presence in the silence that followed, patient, unseen, proud. Training began the next day. The same exercises, the same resistance, the same mistakes. The recruits stumbled, cursed, mocked what they didn't understand, just like he once had. One afternoon, during sensory manipulation drills, a recruit ripped off his headset and shouted, "This is pointless. I can't think when everything's spinning." Davenport didn't yell. He just stepped forward, voice low. "Then that's exactly when you need to think." The recruit glared. "Sir, with respect." Davenport cut him off with a gesture. "You think the enemy waits for you to feel calm. You think fear pauses for permission. The chaos doesn't stop. You do." The room went still. He leaned in closer, eyes calm, tone soft. That's how people die. They stop thinking when they start feeling. You want to survive. Learn to do both. The recruit's defiance faltered. Then slowly he nodded. Davenport stepped back, reset the exercise. It wasn't her voice, but it was her rhythm. The same cadence she had once used to slice through his pride. The same quiet command that demanded transformation instead of obedience. Calloway, now a senior instructor himself, stood at the back of the room, watching. When the recruits filed out, he approached. "You sound like her," he said. Davenport smiled faintly. "No one sounds like her." Calloway shrugged. "Maybe, but she'd be proud." "Would she?" Davenport murmured. "Or would she say I'm soft?" "She'd say, you finally learned the difference between control and compassion." That earned a laugh, small but real. Weeks passed. The recruits improved slowly, painfully. Davenport pushed them hard, but he never shouted. When they failed, he forced them to confront why, not what. He used her methods, unpredictability, awareness, psychological fatigue, but added something new, balance. He refused to let them drown in guilt the way she once had. On the 10th week, he led them into the field for their first live simulation, a full 12-hour endurance run through desert terrain. Minimal rations, broken comms, simulated injuries. By midnight, they were collapsing. He walked among them quietly, observing. One recruit, a young woman named Vega, struggled to drag a teammate up a steep incline. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears. When she finally reached the top, she fell to her knees, gasping. Davenport crouched beside her. "Why didn't you leave him?" Her eyes snapped up, furious. "Because I don't leave people behind." He nodded. "Good, but you almost died trying. What's the difference between loyalty and martyrdom?" She hesitated. "I don't know." He met her gaze. "Find out, because one keeps you human, the other gets you killed." She didn't understand yet, but she would. He stood, eyes tracing the dark horizon. Somewhere, in another desert far away, a woman once asked him the same question. And he'd failed to answer then, too. The program ended with evaluation week, just as it had for his class years ago. But this time, he changed the rules. There were no pre-briefs, no warnings, just a sealed envelope handed to each recruit with a single phrase. "Lead when no one is watching." They were dropped across a 20-mile radius with limited gear and simulated civilians. Their goal wasn't victory, it was adaptability. The unknown was the real test. Davenport and Calloway observed from command, monitoring through heat sensors and remote audio. At first, the recruits floundered, divided, panicked, made rash calls. But over time, something changed. They slowed down, they communicated, they adapted. Calloway leaned back, watching the screens. "They're starting to get it." Davenport nodded. "Because they're failing the right way." Hours later, when the last group returned, dirty, exhausted, bleeding pride instead of blood, he stood before them. "You all failed today," he said. Their faces fell. "Good," he continued, "because failure is a mirror. You can't fix what you won't face." He paused, letting the weight settle. "I failed once. Thought I was strong, thought I didn't need help. I was wrong. Someone showed me that real strength isn't about domination, it's about humility, about learning over and over, no matter how much it hurts." He looked around the room, eyes softening. "That's what keeps you alive when the bullets stop flying, when it's just you and silence and what you did to survive." No one spoke. And then one by one they nodded. Not because they understood completely, but because, for the first time, they wanted to. Later that night, after the recruits had gone to rest, Davenport returned to the classroom alone. The whiteboard was clean, the air still. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a trident pin. Not his, hers. Blackwood had given it to him months after she vanished, saying only, "She'd want you to have this." He turned it over in his hand, feeling its weight. I kept your promise, he whispered. I taught them to adapt. I taught them to think, but I never told them your name. It doesn't belong in books. It belongs in blood. He set the pin on the edge of the desk, her desk, and stepped back. The light above flickered once, then steadied. The next morning, a soft wind blew through the open classroom window. The recruits entered one by one, ready for graduation. The sun caught the trident pin on the desk, making it glint like a small flame. "Whose is that?" Vega asked. Davenport looked at it for a moment before answering. "It belonged to the woman who taught me everything worth knowing. Leave it there." They nodded, instinctively respectful. As the ceremony began outside, Davenport lingered behind, watching sunlight move across the desk. He thought of her, of the woman who'd torn apart his arrogance, who'd shown him that strength meant nothing without empathy, who'd faced her own ghosts and turned them into lessons for others. He thought of her standing in this very room, years ago, facing a crowd of young, foolish men who didn't yet understand the difference between power and wisdom. And he smiled. She had won. Not with force, not with vengeance, but with endurance. That evening, as the bass quieted and the recruits celebrated, Davenport walked down to the shore, the same beach where she had once stood years before. The tide was calm tonight, the water silver under the moonlight. He stopped where the sand met the waves, boots sinking slightly. "Major," he said softly, "I never got to say it." The wind brushed his face, cool and gentle. "Thank you." He looked out over the endless water. "You taught me that leadership isn't about control, it's about care. And that courage isn't about not feeling fear, it's about acting despite it. You were right, strength fades, but purpose does." A wave washed over his boots, retreating just as quietly. He smiled faintly. "Wherever you are, we kept your promise." He stood there for a long time, not mourning, not waiting, just remembering. And somewhere far away, across another coast, another woman stood facing the sea at the same hour, the wind tugging at her hair. She closed her eyes, sensing what words couldn't reach. She didn't know how she knew, only that one of her students had finally become what she'd always hoped he'd be. Whole. The tide rose, then fell. The world moved on. But in the halls of Coronado, in the minds of those who had trained under her shadow, one truth remained unshakable. Legends don't always wear medals. Sometimes they wear silence. Sometimes they leave behind no footprints, only minds sharpened by their lessons, hearts strengthened by their example. Elaine Thorne had taught the art of awareness, the science of adaptation, and the grace of restraint. Merrick Davenport taught what came after. That survival means nothing unless it changes who you become. The waves crashed once, and the stars above caught their reflection in perfect stillness. In that stillness, a voice seemed to linger, faint, distant, eternal. "Remember what I told you, Merrick's strength isn't domination, it's adaptation." He closed his eyes, whispered back. "And dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts."